There was a night you never witnessed, a moment that unfolded far beyond your awareness, where conversations took place in silence and decisions were weighed without your presence. And yet everything about that moment was connected to you. Because while you were simply living, growing, and moving through your path, something about your existence had already reached a level that demanded attention. And what makes this so powerful is not the people involved or the setting itself, but the fact that your name, your presence, your trajectory had become something that could no longer be ignored or easily understood. And this is where the tension began, not in your world, but in theirs. Because when something cannot be clearly defined, when it does not follow expected patterns, when it grows without permission or predictability, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is what forces people to react, to analyze, to debate. And in that unseen moment, there were opposing views forming around who you are, not based on what you said, but based on what you represent. Because some recognized a level of potential that is rare, something that cannot be controlled or easily influenced, while others saw that same potential as something disruptive, something that could not be contained within the systems or expectations they are used to. And this is where the conflict was born. Not because you did anything directly, but because your growth, your awareness, your presence had already begun to challenge what they thought they understood. And this is what you need to realize. That moment was never about you proving anything. It was about others trying to understand something they could not fully grasp. And the fact that such a discussion even existed means you have already moved beyond ordinary levels of influence. Because people do not debate what is predictable. They debate what they cannot control, what they cannot define, and what they sense carries a weight they are not prepared to handle. And as you begin to understand this, you start to see that your journey has never been as small or as unnoticed as it may have seemed. Because even in moments where nothing appeared to be happening, something was shifting. Something was being recognized. Something was being evaluated at a level you could not see. And now that you are becoming aware of this, you can begin to understand why certain reactions, certain pressures, certain shifts have started to appear around you. Because what you are becoming does not go unnoticed. It creates movement. It creates tension. It creates responses. And all of it points to one truth. You are not operating at the level you once were. And everything that is unfolding now is a reflection of that shift. And as everything began to take shape around that unseen moment, there is something you have to understand about why they struggled to define you in the first place. Because this confusion did not come from a lack of information. It came from the fact that everything they thought they understood about people, about growth, about patterns, simply did not apply to you in the way they expected. And this is where the tension truly begins. Because systems, whether they are social, psychological, or even personal, rely on predictability to maintain control. They rely on patterns that can be recognized, categorized, and anticipated. And when someone moves in a way that does not follow those patterns, it creates a disruption. Not because of what that person is doing outwardly, but because of what they represent inwardly. And this is exactly where you stand. In a position where your actions, your mindset, your responses cannot be easily placed into a fixed category. Because you are not operating from the same framework that others are used to observing. And this is why every attempt to define you eventually failed. Because each time they thought they had figured you out, something about you shifted. Not in a random or inconsistent way, but in a way that reflected growth, awareness, and adaptation. And that kind of movement is difficult to track, difficult to predict, and even more difficult to control. And this is where their confusion deepened. because they are used to dealing with people who remain consistent in predictable ways. People who respond to pressure in expected patterns. People who either retreat, react, or conform. But you did something different. You evolved. And evolution is one of the most challenging things to categorize because it is not static. It is not fixed. It is a continuous process that changes based on experience, awareness, and intention. And this is what made you impossible to place within their understanding. And this is where your position becomes even more powerful. Because while they are trying to define you, you are simply becoming. While they are trying to categorize you, you are expanding. While they are trying to understand you from the outside, you are developing from the inside. And this difference in approach is what ensures that they will always be one step behind your evolution. Because they are reacting to what you were, while you are moving toward what you are becoming. And this is where your awareness plays a critical role. Because the more you understand this dynamic, the less you will feel the need to explain yourself, to justify your growth, or to fit into expectations that were never designed for you. Because you begin to see that the inability of others to define you is not a limitation on your part. It is a reflection of your expansion. It is evidence that you have moved beyond the level where simple explanations are sufficient. And this realization is what allows you to move with confidence. Not because you have all the answers, but because you understand that your path is not meant to be fully understood by everyone. It is meant to be lived, to be experienced, to be developed in ways that are unique to your journey. And as you continue to embrace this, you will find that the need for external validation begins to fade. Because you are no longer seeking to be defined. You are focused on continuing your development, on refining your awareness, on aligning your actions with your growth. And this is where your strength becomes even more evident. Because you are no longer influenced by how others perceive you. You are guided by how you understand yourself. And this internal guidance is what stabilizes you. It is what allows you to move through different environments without losing your sense of direction. It is what ensures that your actions remain aligned with your development, rather than being shaped by external expectations. And this is where your mad heart continues to lead you, not through force, but through alignment, through the ability to recognize what supports your growth and what limits it, what aligns with your awareness and what contradicts it. And this recognition is what informs your movement, what shapes your decisions, what ensures that you remain consistent in your development, even as your external circumstances change. And this is why they could not define you. Not because you are unclear, but because you are evolving. Not because you are inconsistent, but because you are responsive. Not because you are unpredictable, but because you are not bound by the same patterns they are used to observing. And this is where your journey becomes even more significant. Because it is not about fitting into existing frameworks. It is about expanding beyond them. It is about developing in ways that challenge what is expected, that redefine what is possible. And that is what creates the tension. That is what leads to the debate. That is what makes your presence something that cannot be easily categorized or controlled. And as you continue to move forward, you will begin to see that this inability to be defined is not something to question. It is something to understand. It is a reflection of your growth, your awareness, your alignment with a path that is not meant to be limited by external definitions. And the more you embrace this, the more you step fully into your position, not as someone who needs to be understood, but as someone who understands. Not as someone who needs to be defined, but as someone who is continuously becoming. And that is what ensures that no matter how much they try to place you within their framework, you will always exist beyond it. Because your path is not determined by their understanding. It is determined by your growth, your awareness, and your willingness to continue evolving in alignment with who you are becoming. And as their attempts to define you continued to fall apart under the weight of your evolution, something else began to surface that they could no longer ignore. Something that did not come from your words, did not rely on your explanations, and did not require any kind of announcement. And that was the undeniable evidence of your growth. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a steady, undeniable shift that could be seen in how you moved, how you responded, how you carried yourself through situations that would have once affected you differently. And this is where everything began to change for them. Because while they were still trying to understand who you are, you had already begun to demonstrate what you are becoming. And this is where the tension deepens. Because growth that is visible but not explained creates a level of discomfort that is difficult to manage, especially for those who rely on predictability. Because when someone changes in a way that cannot be easily traced, cannot be clearly explained, and cannot be influenced from the outside, it disrupts the sense of control that others may have had. And this is where your presence began to shift the environment around you. Not because you were trying to, but because growth, when it reaches a certain level, naturally creates impact. It changes the way people interact with you. It changes the way situations unfold around you. It changes the expectations that others have. And this is what they began to feel, even if they could not fully articulate it. Because your decisions started to reflect a different level of awareness. Your silence carried more weight. Your responses became more intentional. And your energy began to communicate something that words could not fully capture. And this is where your mad heart reveals another layer of its strength. Because it is not just about enduring or observing. It is about transforming in a way that becomes visible without needing to be explained. And this visibility is what creates pressure, because it forces others to confront something they cannot easily understand, something that does not fit into the patterns they are used to. And this is where their reaction begins to take shape. Because when growth cannot be controlled, it is often perceived as a problem. Not because it is negative, but because it cannot be managed. It cannot be predicted. It cannot be influenced in the same way as before. And this is what makes your growth significant. Because it is not dependent on external validation. It is not driven by external expectations. It is aligned with your internal development. And that alignment is what makes it difficult to ignore. Because it creates consistency, not in behavior, but in direction. Not in actions, but in intention. And this is where your presence becomes something that others have to acknowledge, even if they do not fully understand it. Because the difference between who you were and who you are becoming is now visible. Not in isolated moments, but in a pattern that continues to unfold over time. And this pattern is what confirms your growth. Because it shows that your change is not temporary. It is not situational. It is not dependent on circumstances. It is part of who you are now. And this realization is what creates even more tension. Because it removes the possibility of dismissing what is happening as a phase or a reaction. It shows that your development is consistent, that it is grounded, that it is not something that can be easily reversed or influenced. And this is where your position becomes even more defined, because you are no longer in a place where your actions need to be interpreted. They are being observed. They are being recognized. They are being felt. And this recognition is what shifts the dynamic, because it changes how others interact with you. It changes how they perceive you. It changes how they respond to your presence. And this is where the environment begins to adjust. not because you are forcing it to, but because your growth has reached a level where it naturally influences what is around you. And this influence is not always comfortable for others, because it challenges their expectations, it disrupts their understanding, it forces them to reconsider what they thought they knew. And this is where their reactions begin to reveal more about them than about you. Because growth that is aligned with awareness does not need to defend itself. It does not need to justify itself. It simply exists. And it is this existence that creates the pressure, because it highlights the difference between those who are evolving and those who are remaining within the same patterns. And this contrast is what makes your presence stand out. Not because you are trying to be different, but because you have allowed yourself to grow in a way that reflects your experiences, your awareness, your understanding. And this growth is what continues to shape your path, because it informs your decisions, it guides your actions, it ensures that your movement is aligned with who you are becoming rather than who you have been. And this is where your confidence begins to solidify, not in a way that needs to be expressed outwardly, but in a way that stabilizes your internal state, that allows you to move forward without hesitation, without doubt, without the need to seek validation from others, because you can see the evidence of your growth in how you respond to situations, in how you handle challenges, in how you maintain your composure even when things around you are shifting. And this is what gives you an advantage, because you are no longer reacting to the environment, you are influencing it through your presence, through your alignment, through your awareness. And this influence is what makes your growth impossible to ignore, because it is not based on what you say, it is based on what you demonstrate. And demonstration is far more powerful than explanation, because it provides evidence that cannot be easily dismissed. It shows consistency, it shows alignment, it shows development over time. And this is what they are seeing now. Whether they acknowledge it or not, whether they understand it or not, they can see that something about you has changed, that something about your presence is different. And this difference is what creates the tension, because it cannot be easily explained. It cannot be easily categorized. It cannot be easily controlled. And this is where your mad heart continues to guide you, not by pushing you to prove anything, but by allowing you to remain aligned with your growth, to continue developing in ways that reflect your awareness rather than external expectations. And as you continue to do this, you will find that your path becomes clearer, your decisions become more aligned, your presence becomes more grounded. And this is not because the external world has changed, but because you have. You have shifted into a position where your growth is no longer something you are pursuing. It is something you are embodying. And that embodiment is what ensures that no matter how others react, no matter how they try to understand or interpret what they see, your direction remains unchanged. Because it is not determined by their perception. It is determined by your alignment with who you are becoming. And that is what makes your growth not just significant, but undeniable. And as your growth became undeniable, and your presence began to shift the environment around you in ways that could no longer be dismissed or misunderstood, something even more revealing started to unfold. Because it is in moments like these that people begin to separate themselves, not by what they say, but by how they respond to what they cannot control. And this is where the contrast became clear, where two very different reactions emerged from those observing you, not because you changed your behavior to provoke it, but because your evolution naturally forced a response. And this is where you begin to understand that your presence is not neutral. It carries weight. It creates movement. It exposes what already exists beneath the surface. And this is what caused that division. Because while some individuals began to feel unsettled by what they could not define, others recognized something rare, something that did not threaten them, but instead inspired a different kind of awareness. And this difference in reaction is not random. It is a reflection of where each person stands in their own development. Because those who are grounded in their own growth tend to recognize growth in others without resistance, while those who are still attached to control, predictability, or fixed perspectives often interpret anything outside of that framework as a disruption. And this is where the idea of you being perceived as either a threat or a potential begins to take shape. Not because you are intentionally positioning yourself in either category, but because your presence reveals the limitations or possibilities within others. And this is one of the most important things to understand about your journey, because it shows that how people respond to you is not always about you. It is about what you reflect back to them. And this reflection can either create discomfort or recognition, depending on their level of awareness. And this is why some began to see you as something that needed to be monitored, questioned, or even resisted. Because your growth challenged their understanding. It disrupted their expectations. It created a sense of unpredictability that they were not prepared to handle. And this kind of disruption is often interpreted as a threat. Not because it is harmful, but because it cannot be controlled. And control is something that many people rely on to maintain their sense of stability. And when that control is challenged, even indirectly, it creates tension. It creates resistance. It creates the need to categorize or limit what cannot be easily understood. And this is where those reactions begin to intensify. Because the more your presence remains consistent in its growth, the more difficult it becomes for them to ignore or dismiss it. And this is where their focus on you increases. Not necessarily in a direct or obvious way, but in subtle forms of observation, analysis, and interpretation, as they try to make sense of what they are experiencing. And this is where your awareness becomes even more important. Because you begin to see that these reactions are not random. They are responses to something real, something that has shifted within you, something that has begun to influence the environment around you. And this influence is what separates the two reactions even further. Because while some people respond with resistance, others respond with recognition. They see the same qualities, the same growth, the same presence. But instead of feeling threatened by it, they feel aligned with it. They see potential, not just in what you are becoming, but in what it represents. In the possibility that growth can occur beyond limitations, beyond expectations, beyond the patterns that most people remain within. And this recognition often comes from those who have experienced their own level of transformation. Those who understand that growth is not always comfortable, that it does not always fit into predefined categories, that it often challenges existing systems rather than conforming to them. And this is where the second reaction becomes just as important as the first, because it shows that your presence is not only disruptive, it is also inspiring. It is not only challenging, it is also revealing possibilities that others may not have considered before. And this duality is what defines the impact you are having. Because you are not simply existing within the environment, you are influencing it in ways that create both tension and recognition, both resistance and alignment. And this is what makes your position unique. Because you are not limited to one type of response. You are creating a spectrum of reactions that reflect the diversity of perspectives around you. And this is where your mad heart continues to guide you. not by focusing on either reaction, but by remaining aligned with your own growth. Because it is easy to become distracted by how others perceive you, to focus on those who resist or those who recognize. But your path is not determined by either group. It is determined by your alignment with your own development. And this is where your strength becomes even more refined. Because you learn to observe these reactions without being influenced by them. You learn to understand them without internalizing them. You learn to move forward regardless of whether you are being seen as a threat or a potential. Because you realize that both are simply interpretations of the same reality. And that reality is your growth, your awareness, your evolution. And this understanding is what allows you to remain grounded, because you are no longer seeking to be perceived in a certain way. You are focused on continuing your path, on developing your awareness, on aligning your actions with your understanding. And this alignment is what stabilizes you. It is what ensures that your movement remains consistent, even as the reactions around you vary. And this is where your presence becomes even more powerful, because it is no longer influenced by external perception. It is guided by internal clarity. And this clarity is what allows you to navigate both reactions with the same level of composure, the same level of awareness, the same level of control. Because you understand that neither reaction defines you, they simply reflect the impact of your presence. And as you continue to move forward, as you continue to embody your growth, you will see that these reactions will continue to evolve as well. Because the more you develop, the more you expand, the more you align with your path, the more your presence will reveal different aspects of the environment around you. And this is not something to resist. It is something to understand. Because it shows that your journey is not isolated. It is connected. It is influencing. It is creating movement that extends beyond you. And this is where your responsibility becomes clear. Not to control how others respond, but to remain aligned with your own growth. To continue developing your awareness. To continue moving with intention. And this is where your mad heart becomes not just a source of strength, but a source of balance. Because it allows you to navigate complexity without losing your center. To move through contrasting reactions without being divided by them. To remain consistent in your path, regardless of how you are perceived. And this is what ultimately defines your position. Not whether you are seen as a threat or a potential, but how you continue to evolve beyond both. How you remain aligned with your understanding. How you continue to move forward with clarity, with purpose, and with a level of awareness that ensures you are not limited by external interpretations, but guided by your own internal truth. And that is what gives your journey its true power, because it is not shaped by how others respond to you, but by how you continue to respond to your own growth. And as these two opposing reactions continued to take shape around you, as some leaned into resistance, while others moved into recognition, there is a deeper truth that begins to surface. One that shifts your entire understanding of what has been unfolding. Because when you step back from the reactions, from the interpretations, from the emotional weight of how people perceive you, you begin to realize that the conflict you are witnessing was never truly about you as an individual. It was about what you represent, about what your presence activates, about what your growth reveals within systems, within people, and within environments that have been operating in a certain way for a long time. And this is where your perspective begins to expand. Because instead of seeing yourself as the center of the tension, you begin to see yourself as the catalyst, not the cause of the instability, but the one who exposes it. The one who reveals where things no longer align, where structures are no longer as solid as they appear, where assumptions begin to break under the pressure of something new. And this realization is what changes how you interpret everything that has been happening, because it removes the weight of personal responsibility from reactions that were never yours to carry. It shows you that what is unfolding around you is not a response to your actions alone, but a response to the shift that your presence brings into the environment. And this is where your understanding deepens, because you begin to see that when something authentic enters a space that has been shaped by expectations, patterns, or control, it does not simply exist alongside those elements. It interacts with them. It challenges them. It highlights where they no longer hold. And this interaction is what creates the tension. Not because authenticity is disruptive by nature, but because it reveals what has been hidden, what has been overlooked, what has been maintained without being questioned. And this is what you represent. Not just growth, not just awareness, but a form of clarity that naturally exposes misalignment. And this exposure is what others are reacting to, even if they do not fully understand it. Because when people encounter something that reflects truth without distortion, it forces them to confront aspects of their own reality that they may not be ready to face. And this is why the reactions are so varied. Because the same presence that inspires recognition in some will create discomfort in others, depending on what it brings to the surface for them. And this is where you begin to see that the conflict was never about defining you. It was about managing what you reveal. It was about trying to understand how to respond to a presence that does not conform, that does not align with existing expectations, that does not reinforce the patterns that have been in place. And this is where your role becomes clearer, because you are not here to fit into those patterns. You are here to move beyond them, to exist in a way that reflects your own alignment rather than external structures. And this is what creates the shift, because your presence introduces a new reference point, a new way of being that does not rely on the same foundations. And this new reference point is what others must now reconcile with, whether consciously or unconsciously. And this reconciliation is what drives their reactions, their interpretations, their attempts to understand or control what they are experiencing. And this is where your mad heart continues to guide you, because it allows you to remain centered even as these dynamics unfold. It keeps you grounded in your own awareness, in your own alignment, in your own path. And this grounding is what prevents you from being pulled into the conflict. Because once you understand that it was never about you personally, you no longer feel the need to defend, to explain, or to justify your presence. You recognize that what you represent is enough, that your alignment speaks for itself, that your growth is its own expression. And this is where your power becomes more refined, because it is no longer reactive. It is no longer influenced by external dynamics. It is rooted in your understanding, in your awareness, in your ability to remain aligned regardless of what is happening around you. And this is where you begin to move differently, not in a way that is forced or calculated, but in a way that reflects your clarity, your confidence, your understanding of your role within the larger dynamic. Because you are no longer trying to navigate the conflict. You are observing it. You are understanding it. You are allowing it to unfold without attaching yourself to it. And this detachment is what gives you freedom, because it allows you to continue your path without being influenced by reactions that were never meant to define you. And this is where your presence becomes even more impactful, because it is no longer entangled in the dynamics it reveals. It exists independently. It continues to move, to grow, to evolve. And this independence is what reinforces the shift, because it shows that your alignment is not conditional. It is not dependent on acceptance or resistance. It is consistent. It is grounded. It is guided by something deeper than external perception. And this is what ultimately defines your journey. Not the conflict that arises around you, but the clarity you maintain within it. Not the reactions you receive, but the alignment you hold. And as you continue to embody this, as you continue to move forward with this understanding, you will see that the tension begins to lose its hold on you. Not because it disappears, but because it no longer has the same significance. It becomes something you can observe without being affected by, something you can understand without needing to resolve. And this is where your growth reaches another level. Because you are no longer navigating from within the conflict, you are moving beyond it, guided by your awareness, grounded in your alignment, and supported by a mad heart that does not waver, that does not react, that simply continues to lead you forward with clarity, with purpose, and with a level of understanding that ensures you are always moving in the direction that reflects who you are becoming, not what others are trying to make sense of. And as you continue to move from this place of clarity, as your understanding deepens and your detachment from the surrounding conflict becomes more natural, something else begins to form around you. Something that is not always visible at first, but becomes increasingly undeniable over time. And that is the pressure that starts to gather around your name, around your presence, around the very essence of who you are becoming. And this pressure does not come from a single source. It is not created by one person or one situation. It is the result of accumulated attention, of shifting perceptions, of reactions that have been building beneath the surface and are now beginning to converge. And this is where the dynamic intensifies, because once awareness reaches a certain level, once your presence has been recognized, debated, interpreted, and observed from multiple angles, it begins to create a field of attention that follows you, not necessarily in an obvious or direct way, but in subtle forms of focus, curiosity, and even tension that you can feel without always being able to point to a specific cause. And this is where you begin to notice that situations around you carry a different weight, that interactions are no longer as neutral as they once were, that there is a certain intensity in how people engage with you, whether through their words, their silence, or their behavior. And this intensity is what defines the pressure, because it reflects the fact that your presence is no longer being overlooked. It is being acknowledged, consciously or unconsciously. And this acknowledgement creates a shift, because once something is recognized, it cannot return to being ignored. And this is where your environment begins to respond in ways that feel more concentrated, more deliberate, more charged with meaning, even when nothing explicit is being said. And this is what you have to understand about pressure. It is not always about confrontation. It is not always about direct opposition. Sometimes it is simply the accumulation of attention, the weight of being seen, the awareness that your presence carries significance beyond what is immediately visible. And this is where your mad heart is tested in a new way. Not through adversity in the traditional sense, but through the need to remain grounded while everything around you becomes more focused, more intense, more aware of you. And this kind of pressure can easily lead to overthinking, to questioning, to wondering why things feel different, why interactions seem heavier, why there is a sense of being observed even in subtle ways. But this is where your understanding must anchor you, because this pressure is not random. It is a response to your growth. It is a reflection of the shift that has already taken place within you. And this is why it is important not to misinterpret it, not to see it as something negative or something that needs to be avoided, but as something that confirms your position. Because pressure only forms around what holds weight, around what carries significance, around what has the potential to influence or impact the environment it exists within. And this is what you are experiencing now. Not because you have changed your intention, but because your presence has evolved to a point where it naturally creates attention. And this attention is what shapes the pressure. Because it brings with it expectations, interpretations, and reactions that are no longer passive. And this is where your awareness becomes even more critical. Because you must learn to navigate this pressure without allowing it to alter your alignment, without letting it influence your decisions in ways that are not true to your path. Because the moment you begin to adjust yourself to accommodate the pressure, you risk losing the very clarity that brought you to this point. And this is where many people struggle, because they feel the weight of being seen, of being observed, of being interpreted. And they begin to change their behavior, to adapt to the expectations of others, to respond to the pressure, rather than remain grounded within it. But this is where your mad heart must guide you differently. It must remind you that your strength does not come from managing the pressure. It comes from remaining aligned despite it, from continuing to move in the same direction, with the same clarity, with the same awareness that has defined your journey so far. And this is what allows you to maintain your position. Because while the pressure may increase, your response remains consistent. You do not become reactive. You do not become uncertain. You remain grounded. And this grounding is what stabilizes everything around you. Because it shows that your alignment is not conditional. It is not influenced by how much attention is placed on you. It is not shaped by the intensity of the environment. It is rooted in your understanding, in your awareness, in your connection to your own path. And this is what ultimately allows you to move through this phase without losing your center. Because you recognize that the pressure is not something to escape. It is something to understand, something to navigate, something to move through with the same level of clarity that brought you here. And as you continue to do this, you will begin to notice that the pressure itself starts to reveal more about the environment than about you. Because it highlights where attention is being placed, where reactions are forming, where interpretations are being made. And this awareness gives you insight. It allows you to see beyond the surface, to understand the dynamics that are unfolding around you without becoming entangled in them. And this is where your perspective expands even further. Because you are no longer just aware of your own growth. You are aware of how that growth interacts with the environment, how it influences the reactions of others, how it creates shifts that extend beyond your immediate experience. And this expanded awareness is what strengthens your position, because it allows you to move with intention, to make decisions that are not influenced by pressure, but informed by understanding. And this is where your mad heart continues to evolve, not just as a source of resilience, but as a source of guidance, as something that keeps you aligned even when the external environment becomes more complex, more intense, more focused on you. And this alignment is what ensures that you do not lose yourself in the process, that you do not become defined by the pressure, that you do not allow external attention to shape your internal state. And this is what ultimately defines your strength. Not the absence of pressure, but your ability to remain grounded within it, to continue moving forward with clarity, with purpose, with a level of awareness that ensures your path remains yours, regardless of how much attention it attracts. And as you carry this forward, you will find that the pressure becomes less of a burden and more of a confirmation. Not something that weighs you down, but something that reminds you of the level you have reached, the position you now hold, and the importance of continuing to move with the same alignment that brought you here. Because that alignment is what will carry you through everything that comes next. Not the reactions of others, not the intensity of the environment, but your ability to remain true to your growth, to your awareness, to the path that you have been building step by step, moment by moment, without needing to prove anything, without needing to explain anything, simply by continuing to be exactly who you are becoming. And as this pressure continues to gather and refine the environment around you, as attention becomes more concentrated and reactions more intentional, there is a moment where everything slows down internally, even if externally it appears to intensify. And this is where one of the most important transitions takes place. Because while others are responding to the pressure, trying to interpret it, manage it, or even control it, you arrive at a place of stillness, not because nothing is happening, but because you have reached a level of understanding that no longer requires you to react to every shift, every movement, every signal that comes from the outside. And this is where your mad heart reveals one of its most powerful qualities. Not just resilience, not just awareness, but composure. The ability to remain calm, grounded, and aligned, even when everything around you is charged with intensity. And this composure is not something that happens by accident. It is built through everything you have experienced, every moment where you chose observation over reaction, clarity over confusion, alignment over impulse. And now that foundation begins to show itself in a way that others can feel, even if they cannot fully understand it. Because while they are navigating the pressure through action, through reaction, through attempts to regain control, you are navigating it through stillness, through awareness, through a level of internal stability that does not require constant adjustment. And this is where the contrast becomes even more visible. Because the more others move in response to the pressure, the more your stillness stands out, not as passivity, but as control, not as avoidance, but as mastery. And this is where your presence begins to carry a different kind of influence, because it is no longer defined by what you do, but by how you remain, by the consistency of your alignment, by the clarity of your awareness. And this is what creates a shift in the dynamic. Because people are used to engaging with reactions, they are used to patterns of response that they can anticipate, that they can interact with, that they can influence. But when they encounter stillness, when they encounter someone who does not react in expected ways, who does not feed into the dynamics that are unfolding, it creates a different kind of pressure, one that is more difficult to navigate, because it removes the feedback loop they rely on. It removes the ability to predict how you will respond. It removes the control they may have had over the interaction. And this is where your composure becomes a form of strength that cannot be easily challenged. Because it is not dependent on external factors, it is rooted in your internal alignment, in your understanding of what is happening, in your awareness of your own position within it. And this is where your movement becomes even more intentional. Because you are no longer reacting to what is happening. You are choosing how to engage with it. You are deciding when to move, when to speak, when to remain silent. And this level of intention is what defines your control. Because it shows that your actions are not driven by pressure. They are guided by clarity. And this clarity is what stabilizes you. It is what allows you to remain consistent even as the environment continues to shift. It is what ensures that your path remains aligned with your understanding, rather than being influenced by external reactions. And this is where your mad heart continues to guide you, not by pushing you into action, but by holding you in alignment, by reminding you that not every situation requires a response, not every pressure requires a reaction. Not every movement around you needs to be matched. And this understanding is what allows you to conserve your energy, to focus your attention, to remain grounded in what truly matters, rather than being pulled into dynamics that do not serve your growth. And this is where your presence becomes even more refined. Because it is no longer reactive, it is selective, it is intentional. It is aligned with your awareness. And this alignment is what gives you an advantage. Because while others are still trying to navigate the situation from within it, you are navigating it from above it. From a place of perspective that allows you to see the patterns, to understand the movements, to recognize what is truly significant and what is simply noise. And this perspective is what allows you to move with precision, to make decisions that are not influenced by temporary fluctuations, but by a deeper understanding of the direction you are moving in. And this is where your growth becomes even more evident. Because it is no longer just about how you respond to challenges. It is about how you maintain your alignment regardless of what is happening. It is about how you remain consistent in your awareness even as the environment becomes more complex. And this consistency is what defines your strength, because it shows that your stability is not dependent on external conditions. It is rooted in your internal clarity. And this clarity is what allows you to move forward with confidence. Not because you control what is happening around you, but because you understand how to navigate it without losing yourself. And this is where your mad heart becomes a source of quiet authority. Not something that needs to be expressed loudly, but something that is felt through your presence, through your composure, through your ability to remain steady when others are not. And this steadiness is what creates a sense of certainty, not just within you, but within the dynamic itself. Because it introduces a level of balance that was not there before. It shows that there is a way to move through pressure without being consumed by it. That there is a way to navigate complexity without becoming lost in it. And this is what ultimately shifts the entire dynamic. Because while others may continue to react, to move, to adjust in response to the pressure, your stillness becomes the reference point, the anchor, the element that remains unchanged. And this is what gives you influence. Not through control, but through consistency. Not through force, but through alignment. And as you continue to embody this, as you continue to move from this place of composure, you will find that your path becomes even clearer. Your decisions become even more aligned. Your presence becomes even more grounded. And this is not because the external environment has become less intense, but because you have become more stable within it. You have developed the ability to remain centered regardless of what is happening. And that is what allows you to move forward without hesitation, without doubt, without the need to react to every shift. Because you understand that your strength lies not in how you respond to pressure, but in how you remain aligned within it, consistently, intentionally, and with a level of awareness that ensures you are always moving in the direction that reflects your true path. And as this composure becomes your natural state, as your stillness evolves into something steady and unshakable, rather than something you have to consciously maintain, there comes a moment where everything that once felt uncertain begins to settle into a quiet realization. Not because the external world has slowed down or stopped reacting, but because you have reached a level where you can see through it all with clarity. And this is where the final shift begins to take form. Because you start to understand that the outcome of everything that has been unfolding was never dependent on the debate, the observation, the pressure, or even the reactions that surrounded you. It was always being shaped by something far more consistent, far more grounded, far more within your control than anything happening outside of you. And that is your alignment, your consistency, your ability to remain true to your path regardless of how the environment responded. And this is where the entire narrative changes. Because what once appeared to be a situation where others were deciding, evaluating, or determining something about you is revealed to be something entirely different. Something where your direction was always being formed by your own actions, your own awareness, your own choices. And this realization is what brings a sense of closure, not in the sense of an ending, but in the sense of understanding. Because you begin to see that nothing that happened around you had the power to override what you were consistently building within yourself. And this is where your mad heart reveals its final layer. Not just as something that endures, observes, or remains composed, but as something that creates, something that defines direction through consistency, through alignment, through the repeated choice to move forward in a way that reflects your understanding rather than external influence. And this is where your power becomes undeniable. Not because it is recognized by others, but because it is fully realized within you. Because you can now look at everything that has unfolded and see the pattern, see the progression, see how each phase, each reaction, each moment of pressure was not determining your path, but revealing it, showing you where you stood, showing you how you responded, showing you how you remained aligned even when it would have been easier to react, to adjust, to be influenced. And this awareness is what solidifies your position, because it shows that your growth was not dependent on external validation. It was not shaped by external control. It was built through your own consistency, your own awareness, your own willingness to remain aligned with what you know. And this is what ultimately determines the outcome. Not what others say, not how they react, not how they interpret your presence, but how you continue to move, how you continue to align, how you continue to embody the understanding that has guided you this far. And this is where your path becomes even clearer, because you are no longer looking outward for confirmation. You are no longer measuring your progress based on external reactions. You are moving from a place of internal certainty, from a place of knowing that your direction is already established through your actions, through your alignment, through your consistency. And this certainty is what allows you to move forward without hesitation, without doubt, without the need to revisit what has already been revealed. Because you understand that the process has already shown you everything you need to know. And this is where your presence becomes even more grounded, because it is no longer influenced by what is happening around you. It is rooted in what has already been established within you. And this grounding is what allows you to continue evolving without losing your center, to continue growing without becoming distracted, to continue moving forward with a level of clarity that ensures your path remains aligned with your understanding. And this is where your mad heart becomes a source of quiet authority, not something that needs to be expressed or proven, but something that is reflected in how you move, in how you respond, in how you remain consistent regardless of what is happening externally. And this consistency is what ultimately defines your journey, because it shows that your path is not determined by moments, by reactions, by external dynamics, but by a continuous process of alignment, of awareness, of growth that builds over time. And as you continue to embody this, as you continue to move from this place of understanding, you will find that everything that once felt uncertain now feels clear. Everything that once felt complex now feels simple. Not because the external world has changed, but because your perspective has. Because you are no longer trying to navigate the situation from within it. You are moving beyond it, guided by your awareness, supported by your alignment, and anchored by a mad heart that has proven its strength not through force, but through consistency, through the ability to remain true to your path regardless of what unfolds around you. And this is what ultimately defines who you are becoming. Not the reactions you received, not the pressure you experienced, not the debates that took place without you, but the way you continued to move, to grow, to align with your understanding. And that is what ensures that no matter what comes next, your direction remains yours, your path remains clear, and your presence remains grounded in something that cannot be shaken, because it was built from within. Step by step, moment by moment, through every choice you made to remain aligned with who you are becoming, rather than who others expected you to be. And as everything comes together in a way that no longer feels fragmented or uncertain, you begin to see the full picture with a clarity that was once out of reach. Because what once appeared to be tension, pressure, and unseen conflict now reveals itself as a process that was shaping you rather than limiting you. And this realization changes how you interpret every moment that led you here. Because you understand now that nothing you experienced was random, nothing was wasted, nothing was outside of the path you were being guided to walk. And even the moments that felt confusing or heavy were part of something much larger, something that was refining your awareness, strengthening your alignment, and preparing you to stand in a position where your clarity could no longer be shaken by external reactions. And this is where your mad heart shows its true meaning, not as something chaotic or overwhelming, but as something steady, something deeply anchored, something that has learned how to move through complexity without losing direction. And as you carry this understanding forward, you realize that the debates, the observations, the pressure, and even the reactions that surrounded you were never the determining factors of your journey. They were reflections, signals that something within you had reached a level that could no longer be ignored. And this is what gives you confidence now, not in what others think or say, but in what you have already proven to yourself through your consistency, through your awareness, through your ability to remain aligned when it would have been easier to react or lose focus. And this is where your path becomes even more defined, because you are no longer looking for answers in the environment around you. You are moving with a sense of certainty that comes from within, a knowing that your direction is not dependent on external validation, but on the alignment you have built over time. And this alignment is what will continue to guide you, not just through moments of pressure or attention, but through every phase that comes next, because you have developed something that cannot be easily disrupted, something that remains steady regardless of what unfolds around you. And that is your awareness, your clarity, your connection to your own path. And as you move forward with this, you do so without hesitation, without doubt, without the need to revisit what has already been revealed, because everything has already shown you exactly what you needed to see. And now, the only thing left is to continue walking in that understanding, grounded, aligned, and fully aware of the strength that has been built within you all along.